Rarely is an MMA fighter as divisive as Brock Lesnar, a natural talent who surpassed expectations to become one of the sport's biggest stars, or a fast-tracked gimmick exposed at the top level. Today, we look at the highs and lows of Lesnar's MMA career, and whether criticisms thrown at the former pro wrestler are justified. Welcome to the INC, and this is the story of Brock Lesnar in the UFC. Few MMA fighters have had a road to the top quite as colorful as Lesnar's. After failing to join the National Guard at the age of 17, Lesnar attended the University of Minnesota on the back of a wrestling scholarship, becoming a two-time NCAA All-American and Division I champion, and later serving as the inspiration for Undercover Nerd starring Rainier Wolfcastle. With his natural athleticism and amateur credentials, it didn't take long for Lesnar to find suitors, and after graduating from college, he signed a developmental contract with the WWE. Over the next 4 years, Lesnar became one of WWE's biggest stars, the youngest champion in company history, and a central figure of their ruthless aggression era, all while showcasing the brute strength that later defined his MMA run. By 2004, Lesnar had grown frustrated with the WWE's creative direction, turning down a $45 million contract to leave the promotion that March. Having burned his bridges in pro wrestling and a failed venture in the NFL, Lesnar looked for new ventures to satisfy his competitive edge, and in 2006 began training with the Minnesota Martial Arts Academy under Marty Morgan. What was dismissed as a novelty became a full-blown assault on the sport, and in June 2007, Lesnar made his pro debut for K1 Dynamite, scoring a first-round win over Olympic medalist Min Soo Kim. Among the men in attendance that night was UFC President Dana White, who saw Lesnar as someone who could revive interest in their heavyweight division following the Tim Sylvia reign of terror. After just one fight and over a minute of action, Lesnar was signed to a one-fight contract in October, with the pro wrestler expected to make his company debut early next year. Lesnar would face a strong litmus test in his company debut. Frank Mir had used his grappling prowess to claim UFC gold in 2004, but had struggled for form after returning to the sport following a motorbike crash. Lesnar vs. Mir would serve as the co-main of UFC 81, with 650,000 buys, making it one of the most bought pay-per-views at the time. Lesnar scored an early takedown before swarming the veteran with ground and pound, seemingly on the verge of an early stoppage, until referee Steve Mazzagatti deducted Lesnar a point due to illegal shots to the back of the head. The pause in action gave Mir enough time to recover, before the submission wizard pulled a rabbit out of the hat to hand the pro wrestler his first career loss.
Lesnar! He's gonna get it! He taps over! Frank Mir defeats Brock Lesnar!
While detractors try to dismiss Lesnar as a failed publicity stunt, fan consensus was more positive. Brock proving he had the physical attributes to compete at the top level, even if he didn't have the experience to match. The decision was made to give Lesnar a second shot at the octagon, and after a match with Mark Coleman fell through, the call instead went to longtime Pride veteran Heath Herring. While Herring had been one of Pride's biggest stars in its early tenure, he was considered well past his best by 2008, with many believing the fight was being used as a showcase fight to give Lesnar an easy win. Even referee Dan Miragliotta tried to give Lesnar a hand in the pre-fight stare-down.
I think Dan Miragliotta accidentally poked Heath Herring in the eye there. Oops, yep.
Lesnar dropped Herring in the opening seconds and never looked back, dominating Herring with his wrestling on his way to a unanimous decision. The consensus of Lesnar at the time was that of a raw prospect who could reach the top level with years of good guidance. The UFC, however, decided to expedite the process. During 2007, heavyweight champion Randy Couture had grown at loggerheads with the UFC, expressing displeasure at his low fighter pay and even showing a willingness to vacate the belt for a match with Fedor Emelianenko. The UFC knew they needed a marquee match to keep Couture on board, and fast-tracked Lesnar to a title shot against the champion at UFC 91. While the UFC had often put profit over meritocracy, most notably with Ken Shamrock's title shot against Tito Ortiz, few examples were more blatant than Lesnar, with many believing handing such a match to a 2-1 fighter damaged the legitimacy of the promotion. Couture got the better of Lesnar during a competitive first round. But with Brock boasting a near 50-pound weight advantage, the champion was always vulnerable to Lesnar's power. This came to a head in the second round as Lesnar dropped Couture with a straight right, setting the stage for one of the most unlikely champions in UFC history.
Brock Lesnar is the new UFC heavyweight champion of the world!
Lesnar's win divided the MMA community. Supporters used the match as evidence Brock was worthy of being considered a legitimate fighter. Others, however, saw Lesnar as the recipient of favorable matchmaking, and had only claimed the belt due to Couture's age, size, and lack of in-ring action in recent years. Questions over Lesnar's worthiness followed him to 2009, when he took on former foe Frank Mir at UFC 100. Mir had completed his career turnaround by becoming the first man to finish MMA legend Minotauro Nogueira, with the UFC using his rematch with Lesnar to headline their marquee event. Despite bulking up for the match, Mir offered no answer to Lesnar's offense, as Brock neutralized his opponent's grappling on his way to a brutal second-round stoppage. Having avenged the sole loss of his career, it seemed as if the only man who could stop Lesnar was himself. Unfortunately, this proved too accurate for comfort. In November 2009, Lesnar was diagnosed with an extreme form of diverticulitis, a gastric disease causing severe inflammation of the body's digestive system. Lesnar was forced to undergo surgery to close a perforation that had been leaking fecal matter into his abdomen, with Lesnar later suggesting the illness would have been fatal if not treated in time. While Brock recovered, Shane Carwin was embarking on a wave of terror in the heavyweight division, winning all of his fights in the first round, including his destruction of Frank Mir at UFC 111. All roads pointed towards Carwin challenging Lesnar for his title, with their match at UFC 116 breaking the record for the most watched pay-per-view in company history. The fight was billed as a battle of Lesnar's strength and Carwin's knockout power, and in the early stages of the first round, the challenger struck first blood.
Knee by Carwin. Carwin's got Lesnar on the run. Shane Carwin trying to finish.
Despite eating several shots, referee Josh Rosenthal gave Lesnar every opportunity to stay in the bout, eventually surviving the onslaught as Carwin gassed himself out attempting to finish his opponent. Lesnar didn't need a second opening, putting his experience in cow tipping to good use before submitting the engineer in the middle of the second round. While Lesnar won kudos for overcoming adversity, internal problems and a dislike for taking strikes were increasingly evident. And by the time he faced Cain Velasquez at UFC 121, many feared the writing was on the wall for the wrestler's title reign. Much like Carwin, Velasquez had entered the contest highly regarded, having won all but one of his fights in the distance and boasting a mix of cardio and striking to neutralize Lesnar's size advantage. Lesnar started in gung-ho fashion to take Velasquez down in the opening seconds, but questions remained over how the fighter would respond should Cain return to his feet. They got their answer midway through the first round.
Oh, huge knee to the body. Lesnar's in big trouble.
Velasquez would finish Lesnar in the later stages of the first round, taking both Lesnar's title and seemingly his mystique in the process. The manner of the loss leading many to question how much of Brock's success had been down to good fortune over his own skill set. The biggest positive of Lesnar's evening came from a confrontation with The Undertaker, a move Taker later claimed planted the seed for their infamous WrestleMania match 4 years later. After a coaching role on the 13th season of The Ultimate Fighter, Lesnar was linked to a match with Junior Dos Santos at UFC 131, only to withdraw from the bout after undergoing surgery following another bout of diverticulitis. Despite his comparatively recent success, the extended break led many to see Lesnar as little more than an attraction fighter, a stigma that followed him into his comeback bout against Alistair Overeem at UFC 141. Overeem wasted little time attacking Lesnar's ailing body, hammering the wrestler with constant knees and body kicks before the accumulation of strikes proved too much by the middle of the first. A second straight stoppage seemingly spelled the end of the Lesnar experiment, a sentiment Brock himself shared in his post-fight interview.
I've had a really difficult couple of years with my disease. I'm going to officially say tonight was the last time you'll see me in the octagon.
Lesnar called time on his MMA career with a 5-3 record. but with the burden of all of his losses coming in the first round. This, however, did not deter the WWE, who signed Lesnar to a big money contract in April 2012, with Lesnar's MMA experience used to position him as the company's monster heel. With his WWE run rehabbing his image, rumors began of Lesnar returning to MMA in the future, only for Brock seemingly to close the door on the sport when he signed a contract extension in 2015. That was until the first promo aired for UFC 200.
Can you see me now? Can you see me now?
What does that mean?
I think that means that Brock Lesnar is back.
In one of the sport's biggest ever secrets, well, unless you were following Ariel Helwani, Lesnar announced a one-off return to MMA, where he'd take on fan favorite Mark Hunt in the co-main of UFC 200. While Lesnar's return garnered much interest from casual media, those within the sport raised skepticism of his appearance, wondering how the notoriously jacked Lesnar could pass USADA's drug test on short notice. The fighter himself responded to the rumors in typically blunt fashion.
I've been dealing with that my entire life. I'm a white boy, and I'm jacked. Deal with it.
While Lesnar's appearance was the biggest attraction on the card, the fight itself proved underwhelming, as Brock took Hunt down on multiple occasions in a dominant but risk-adverse performance, getting the judges' nod by unanimous decision. The fight's biggest talking point came in the months after, when it was revealed Lesnar, surprise surprise, failed a pre-fight drug test for clomiphene, and his win overturned to a no contest. Hunt's reaction, meanwhile, proved much more extreme, with the fighter filing a court action lawsuit against the UFC for allowing Lesnar to fight despite knowing he was using banned substances. Lesnar returned to WWE shortly after, even avenging his loss to Cain Velasquez in Saudi Arabia. But rumors of an in-cage return continued to surround the fighter, most notably in 2018 when he confronted Daniel Cormier following his heavyweight title win at UFC 226. The fracas giving Lesnar one of his greatest promos for several years.
Nagano's a piece of Miocic's a piece of DC, I'm coming for you.
Nearly 15 years after his debut, Lesnar's UFC run continues to split fans. Detractors seeing him as an overpushed novelty who damaged the sport's legacy short-term. But the fact he found success, let alone won a title, proves there was more natural ability than many give him credit for. Lesnar's brash persona and exciting matches were a key factor in heavyweight's renaissance of the 2010s, and should largely be seen with positive eyes by those associated with the sport. Well, that is, unless you're Mark Hunt.
Fuck you, you're getting sued. You scummy cunt, you think? I mean, the problem is everyone thinks, hey man, I want to get into the UFC. Fuck the UFC, you're shit.
This is the INC. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video.